Jackanoid Paralope is a mission-driven media company. Check out more of our podcasts at jackanoidparalope.com.
Jackanoid Paralope!
Michael.
Nathaniel.
Gamergate and Operation Lollipop.
Welcome to the internet.
From Jackanoid Paralope, this is the Beta Boi Breakdown with Michael and Nathaniel.
This, full disclosure, is the third time that we've recorded this episode on Gamergate. So what have you learned from the first two recordings about this thing?
It's funny. This was one of the first episodes that we recorded. And I think we were still figuring out the format and the vibe and the voice of this show, first of all. And so we've learned that in the time since. So it's kind of funny that this is probably going to be the last one we record now for season one. So that feels like a nice little bookend just in and of itself. In terms of Gamergate itself, I am most compelled by how this kind of maps to not necessarily a causation, but a correlation to the MAGA playbook. How it really kind of encompasses this outrage factor and understands the internet and understands how things go viral in a really, there's no other word for it, playbook kind of way. So it really allows for a lot of movement and traction and outcomes that can be, weaponized and monetized and spread really easily. So I wouldn't say, maybe you can tell me this, but I wouldn't say this is the first time maybe that somebody figured this stuff out, but it certainly seems from what we've covered the first two recordings and what I know you're going to cover right now, that this was really effective use of that kind of strategy.
Yeah, so with Gamergate, the fascinating thing to me is how it oscillates between both something that's really critically important to understand and total shit that does not matter. And those things kind of exist at the same time with this. Like part of this is tale as old as time, right? Men feeling threatened about something and reacting in completely inappropriate ways, in a lot of ways, spewing a lot of hatred and a lot of vitriol towards women that they perceive to be their enemies. But the way that it's done, this is it. Gamergate happened in 2014, so we're in the modern era with this, and so the modern spin that gets put on it is interesting, and where that leads, like you hinted towards a MAGA playbook, and a lot of the early MAGA characters from Trump 1.0 are present here in Gamergate, and so learning about how they capitalized on this specific crisis in masculinity, if you want to call it that, and really leveraged it for power and for money is way more fascinating than the actual nuts and bolts timeline of Gamergate itself. If the audience wants to go listen to a timeline of Gamergate, they can find another podcast to do it, and they can go to Rational Wiki. Has become my favorite website that really goes through and breaks Gamergate down day by day. So y'all go there if you want to get a really, really hardcore timeline about this. I'm going to be more focused on, and what we're going to be more focused on is how this relates to masculinity and the quote unquote crisis of masculinity, and how that crisis can become weaponized and used for political and power gains. How we as men slot into this nice little army that people are trying to create with us and the fallout therein. So let's just get into it. All right. So Gamergate, I'm imagining a lot of our audience does not know what Gamergate is. This might be the first time you've heard about Gamergate. And if that's the case, Bless you. You are so lucky. You still have time to turn this
definitely
episode
didn't
off
know
right
until
now.
we spent a few hours doing this thing. I
Yeah.
really didn't know the nuts and bolts either. So,
Yeah.
bless your heart.
This is the last warning. Put the podcast on mute because we want the view, right? but like you can still walk away. I'm giving you the opportunity. Okay, that was your opportunity. Now we're into it. So, what was Gamergate? So, Gamergate was an organized harassment campaign deriving from the perceived pussification of video games, led by large game developers and a handful of women in the gaming industry, specifically independent developers, critics, and journalists. So, the harassers used manipulative tactics to muddy the narrative around this controversy, pumping up the narrative that Gamergate was about ethics in game journalism rather than targeted harassment. Right? So, from that point, a lot of these journalists and a lot of these content creators, they took this bait and they covered Gamergate from a like let's investigate how valid the gamers' concerns are angle rather than a look at these gamers and how they're doxing and swatting these women because they're mad that like Laura Croft's boobs are smaller now or some shit like that. So this controversy, like very soon into it, also what we get is like a are you with me so far? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I wanted to quickly get a definition on doxing and swatting, just so we can kind of put tangibles to what the attacks on women actually were manifested as.
So doxing, if anybody doesn't know, it refers to like putting people's personal identification information out online with the purpose of like stochastic terrorism, so that somebody will see this information and act on it, right? They'll either like they know where you live, they'll send stuff to your house, they can harass you and make you think that like danger is imminent, right? And then swatting specifically is a relatively new thing where you can call police stations like SWAT teams and claim that there is some kind of bomb threat or something at a location, usually the person's doxed address. And so the SWAT team comes into your house and just fucks up your life for the whole day and just completely ruins it. So those are two harassment techniques used by the internet. I should say that this is not a left-right thing. Marjorie Taylor Greene has been swatted several times at her house, and it's like, for as much as we hate Marjorie Taylor Greene, that is just a completely inappropriate thing to do to somebody. But so those were the tactics, some of the tactics that these gamers used against these women who they perceived to be their enemy, right? So that's what's kind of going on. But what happens around it is this idea that we have now, like feed the beast for content creators. So we understand this a little bit better now than we did in 2014. But it's this idea that like, how much is the content that these content creators are creating? How much of it is driven by themselves for the audience? And how much of it is like them seeing the audience's engagement with their content? And so they push their content to feed the audience, if that makes sense. So like how they are monetizing based off of their content, how much of it is them driven and how much of it is their audience driven. And that gets wrapped up here in Gamergate because, like I was saying, a lot of this coverage was being monetized. And as this coverage was being monetized, these content creators were incentivized to polarize the coverage, right? So their incentive to go to the extremes and to the poles because that's driving engagement. And then the more that the engagement grows, well, the more they produce polarizing content. And you get into this kind of cycle where the coverage around it is just pumping up this polarized narrative and activating the two bases on either side, and you're losing all of the nuance in the middle, or all of the, in this case of Gamergate, even just like the clear, like this is harassment type of angle is lost for this kind of like, well, are the gamers right or are the victims right? Like what's going on here? And so because that coverage gets monetization, that's what the creators are incentivized to make. And we understand this a little bit better now in 2025 than we did in 2014. Like this is what was happening. But like this is a very clear example of something like this happening and where downstream of that, like what the effects are in our society and in American culture and in politics, et cetera, et cetera. So um, also, the more polarized like this coverage becomes, like the more it activates your base. I think I mentioned that before, but like I just want to stress that becomes like really important. And these bases, the Gamergate side of it, are basically angry men, right? So it's 2014. You have a lot of angry young men online with a lot of anger towards loss of their identity as a gamer or towards like an ideology they feel like is being shoved down their throats. And the reaction to that like parallels slots nicely in with this, Breitbart, Steve Bannon, Milo Yiannopoulos, like all of those guys are, a lot of the early MAGA guys are characters in this story. And how much of it was them being monetized to get in on this fight, and how much of it was them like uh, uh, um, with an active plan to raise this army is like our questions that this becomes. And so it's fascinating from all that angle.
So before we get too into like this basically like raise the army correlation effect, you're talking about this group of kind of disenfranchised, angry young men online, and I know that you mentioned there's timeline. What was it called? Rational Wiki.
Yeah, Rational Wiki
breaks down the timeline of this and kind of gives context as to like what was happening in this space in the gaming industry and why there was this vitriol already kind of growing and ready to spill over. Is that something we're going to get into on this take 3 of Gamergate?
Yeah, we'll get into it a little bit. Again, like that's like the least interesting part of it is like the nuts and bolts of what happened. More interestingly is, okay, how did those nuts and bolts project outward and become things that are still in our society today? So about a couple days after we recorded one of our takes, Sydney Sweeney, that whole controversy happened. And I remember texting you right when it happened, and I was like, it's the same fucking playbook, dude. Like, look at this Sydney Sweeney thing. It is exactly what they did at Gamergate, updated 10 years for like, different social media platforms and stuff like that. But they're using the same fucking playbook in order to generate these controversies that may or may not really exist, aren't really that big a deal, but they can use it as fuel in a culture war to like really kind of make you think that like your identity as a conservative is under attack and under threat from these people that don't like Sydney Sweeney's genes or whatever. And it's so frustrating because, how do you combat that? we understand what they're doing now, but like it's still having the same effect, which is like when they gin up all this controversy and then they put it out there online and make money off of it. And downstream of that, it ends up on someone's fucking aunt's Facebook page as like, look at how these liberals are destroying America. And then that's getting reflected now in terms of, man, we got the president saying a bunch of stuff about how liberals are, the enemy within and how we're terrorists and all this kind of shit. And it's like, it all comes back to Gamergate. And that's where I think the fascinating thing is.
Yeah, I hear it.
Yeah. Okay, so this podcast is about the red pill manosphere, right? Like, and like how Gamergate. I wanted to do it here because obviously it intersects with the red pill, but there are like certain ideas that the red pill has that that also jive with like what was going on here at Gamergate. And so I wrote a couple of them down. I wrote the pussification of men, right? Like that is a huge theme in the red pill, and the red pill content is just like the idea that men today are feminized, are like we're soy boys, right? Like we're not real men, and real being some version of masculinity that was in the past, right? Like there's some type of man in some type of era that these men are aspiring to be. I think it's kind of like the rugged individualist Teddy Roosevelt type of man that they're going for. And that's what a man is. And look today at how horrible these men are. They're just playing video games and they're low sperm count and they're not reproducing and all these things, right? So that's a big idea in the manosphere. It's also a big idea here in Gamergate. The masculinity crisis, just in general, is a big factor in Gamergate, and I want to put masculinity crisis like in air quotes. Like, I'm not 100% sold on the idea that we're in a quote unquote masculinity crisis.
How would you define a masculinity crisis?
Well, I was going to say I think more accurately, we've been in a masculinity crisis for a long ass time. And this is just like the new iteration and flavor of the same crisis. Because what it is to be a man in modern society now that there's no longer like bears to kill and villages to protect has been like a question for a long ass time. And so,
how do you prove your manhood, basically, is what you're talking about?
Yeah, how do you prove your manhood? What makes a real man, quote unquote? All of those things kind of get swept up into here. And like the loneliness epidemic, again, I'm not 100% sure how necessarily that has to do with masculinity or what, but like it is a thing. If you go search articles, there was an LA Times article I read that said 1 in 7 men don't have a close friend. I've heard numbers like 1 in 5 men before. From
like
various
if there's a crisis,
things.
They wouldn't have somebody to call, is something I've heard.
Yeah, there's nobody to call, right? And how much of that is like something society is doing to men? Like the red pill is going to say that this is society doing something to men, and men are the victims of whatever's going on, and it's showing up in this, loneliness epidemic or this crisis of masculinity. And so we can use the fact that these things are showing up as proof that we're doing things the wrong way and we need to return to quote unquote traditional masculinity, right? Or you can look at these things as like, okay, masculinity has certain bad things that come along with it, along with certain good things. And the bad things are causing us to kind of, as men, like retreat further and further into ourselves, right? And that's kind of the angle I take with it. It's less a victimhood mentality, but the red pill puts it in a victim thing.
There's a couple things that jumped out at me, and you kind of circle back just to one of them right there, which was turning inward and kind of closing down. Because the way to kind of foster connection with other people, and we've talked about it in various ways already through this podcast, is vulnerability. Like opening up is what fosters meaningful connection, not only with romantic partner, but with friends and all that stuff. But this idea that men have to be strong all the time and to be vulnerable is to be weak, or soy boy, beta boy, or whatever else like that. If you show, weakness at all, it closes off that opportunity for connection. And where the manosphere, the red pill manosphere, seems to kind of knowingly sweep into that is it fosters connection and community through different means. It says, hey, you're a victim, and you can find your tribe over here, and we can find community and joy and connection in our way by having a common perceived enemy. We're all in this together. You finally reached home, So by aspiring to be this like 50s male who's shut off from his emotions, and by the way, like the other thing I was going to say is this idea of a male from back in the day that we aspire to, a lot of the men were really unhappy. And I was listening to a podcast the other day that was describing like a lot of times like the extent to which there were men who basically committed suicide back in the day would be like, no, dad fell in the garage. Like it was covered up. It wasn't talked about, but it has always been there that men need to reconcile with what it is to show emotion, to understand emotion. And it's not there isn't really a roadmap to do that until you talk openly with friends and open up as to the unique challenges, and realize they're shared challenges, that there are people who will understand, but like we're getting messaging all the time that to do so is weak. So finding that road kind of like maps to what this loneliness epidemic kind of is and what it's grown out of.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of, I made the point a little earlier that this is like, this isn't a new thing.
No.
Like this crisis of masculinity and this loneliness epidemic isn't necessarily a new thing. It's a like reiteration of the same kind of bullshit we've had in men. Like I want to say post-industrial revolution, like the since we don't have to like protect anything anymore. We don't have to. We all we have to be is providers, right? All we have to. We are good for our paycheck, kind of idea, kind of leads to like this identity crisis. And now, in modern days, I mean, like you can't even provide for a family on one income usually
No.
anymore. Like it's very very rare if a man is able to provide for his family based solely off his income. That's a very privileged position for a man.
And that's not women's fault.
No, not at all.
That
No.
is inflation's fault. That is big business's fault. Like
Yeah,
everything is
yeah.
more expensive, and you get paid less than you would have if it was equivalent back in the day.
Yeah, that's a capitalism fault.
Yeah.
That's a lack of unions in America fault. Like that's so many other things. But like, I mean, now we're not needed to be protectors, right? I don't need to protect a woman in terms of like, you know, she's a damsel in a tower and I have to protect her. And I can't even be a provider anymore. Like very rare that a man can be a provider. So if we're not protectors and we're not providers, like where do we get our sense of identity from? And I was listening to Behind the Bastards, that podcast. They have an episode that's like tangential to Gamergate. It's men, grifter men, and they talk about Gamergate a lot. So I was listening to it, and the host made a great point, which is like if you can't be a protector and you can't be a provider, your identity is going to go into your hobby, right? So it's like, well, what makes me different from other men? And it's the fact that I'm really good at a hobby. Right, I am whatever that hobby is. For me, it's Texas Hold'em poker. For somebody, it might be woodworking, like a Nick Offerman kind of thing. But the most popular hobby in America today, especially for men, is gaming. Right. So their entire identity is how good they are at gaming, like how awesome their character in Elden Ring or whatever is. Like that's very important to them. And so when that feels threatened, or they see a bunch of their favorite content creators or journalists telling them that it's threatened, right? That's a high stakes fucking problem for a lot of these guys. And it's just real fucking unfortunate that they can't think of a way to like express that or cope with that beyond like harassing innocent people.
So how was that identity under attack? Like, I know that we don't want to get into the weeds of what Gamergate was. You kind of wanted to focus on the larger ramifications of ripple effects. But just to clarify for anyone who is unaware and all that stuff, how was that identity of theirs under attack that prompted this outrage?
Good question. I don't know. So something I'm struggling with right now, like I talked about a little bit before, is like how much of this is real and how much of this is perceived. And I don't know the answer to that question 100%. What I do know is that a lot of these men really genuinely do think that their identity is under threat, especially here in terms of Gamergate. So like perception is reality, right? So whether these men actually are under attack or whether or not is less important than the fact that they definitely feel under attack. And so that is explaining how their reactions quite accurately. It's like, okay, yeah, they feel like they're a cat in a corner, right? And
Why do they feel
they're
that?
gonna fight and claw back.
Why do they feel that?
According to them,
Yeah.
right? Specifically in terms of Gamergate, right? It is this, for lack of better words, woke ideology that is coming into gaming, that all of a sudden men are now being presented with diversity, equity, and inclusion in video games, right? Characters aren't all white anymore. Boob jiggle physics is like not a thing anymore. Like I can't sexualize these women inside these video games the way I used to. Therefore, these women are taking that away from me through their quote unquote, you know, social justice warrior woke ideology and stuff. And so that's the threat. If I can just get these women and get this diversity out of my hobby, then I can have my identity back. Now, is that bullshit? Yes, that's bullshit. But is it real to them? Yeah. They're not being cynical when they say, you know, I feel like this is the only space that I have and women are taking it away from me. They're genuinely feeling that. But what does that mean? Is that real? No, I don't think it's real. Okay, so I think the best way kind of to talk about what you were kind of saying is like, let's just kind of go through and talk about like gaming and like internet stuff really quickly to kind of get us everybody up to speed into 2014. A lot of the stuff I feel like our listeners will know, so I'm going to go over it pretty quickly. But I feel like it's important to kind of mention just to kind of give the idea of like, you know, what's in the cultural soup of computers and stuff like that. So, great NPR Planet Money podcast on women in computing and women in coding, and how computers used to be a female dominated space, right? This computing was seen as clerical work. It was seen as more secretarial work. My mother had a master's in computer science from Carnegie Mellon University, and she got it in the late 70s, early 80s, right? And she was on that first wave where computing still was seen or could be seen as a woman-dominated market. That changed with home computing, right? Home computers were marketed specifically to boys. They were not marketed to young girls. They were in toy stores, and toy stores are very gendered. And so the decision was made by these marketing executives when computers were first coming into the home to put them into the boys section of the toy store. And so what that led to is boys getting a leg up in computing, right? Computer science. If my mom had been in a graduate in computer science program in the 90s or in the 2000s, she would have been the minority of people. She would have been dominated by men who had had so many more years of experience in computing because they grew up with them, right? So this leads to the internet and to computing and programming becoming a very male dominated space. And I think we all know if we go online today, like it's still majority dominated by men, especially a lot of these early message boards like 4chan and all those types of places are, and gaming itself is a very male dominated space. And so I think that fits with when Gamergate starts to happen and we start to get men who are like thinking again, like this is some DEI kind of stuff coming into gaming. It's because this was a space that they had for themselves for so long. So any bit of opening up into some voices that weren't, men's voices is seen as a threat to them. If you are on 4chan, which I did spend some time on 4chan for this recording, you'll know the rules of the internet that were that were developed back in the early 2000s, and it's just like rules that are true on the internet. Like the most famous one is Rule 34, which is there is a porn of it. So like if you can think of it on the internet, there's porn of it, right? But there are other rules too. That Rule 30 is there are no girls on the internet. Right. And so it's kind of cementing the idea that this is a male space, right? When there are no girls on the internet, these men are talking about literally, right? Right. There should be no girls on the internet. It is all men. And also that these spaces, women shouldn't remind people that they are women on this space. Like I can tolerate being a woman as long as you don't tell me you're a woman or I know that you're a woman, right? So it just feeds this idea that the internet is created for and populated by men. It ends up getting into like this locker room type of atmosphere. What were you going to say?
I was going to say tits or get the fuck out.
Yeah, that's Rule 31. Right. So Rule 31 is tits or get the fuck out, which is just men saying like, hey, if you're a woman and I know you're a woman, at least show me your tits. If you show me your tits, then I can think of you as a sexualized object and therefore you're allowed to stay. Right. So the women are OK as long as it's in a pornographic or sexualized way, but not there if they actually like have opinions and shit they want to say. Right. So that's early internet. 2010 through 2014, I want to talk about hashtag activism. Do you remember what hashtag activism is from our previous recordings?
I do. It's when you kind of use a hashtag to get a certain topic into the feeds of a bunch of people so that whether they're agreeing with it or not agreeing with it, if they're using the hashtag, it lifts everything up.
Kind of, sort of. Yeah, that's what hashtag activism ends up doing. but like the actual term hashtag activism comes from Twitter, right, with the use of hashtags. And it starts in the Arab Spring in like 2010, 2011, when all of those like what do you call it? All those revolutions and upheavals were going on in countries like Egypt and around the Middle East, where it was like you could make a hashtag, and because it's a hashtag, anybody could search that hashtag and see conversations going on. So these activists in the Middle East were using these hashtags and posting pictures and videos of what was going on from these upheavals and these revolutions in real time. Right. No longer do I need a reporter to tell me what's going on in the news. I can go on Twitter and see what their activists on the street are doing right then and there. Other examples are
it feels very immediate. Like you
very
don't need an
grassroots,
intermediary.
right? Right, decentralized, very grassroots, very decentralized. All of those types of things of activism. That there are other examples from the United States, like Occupy Wall Street. Hashtag Occupy Wall Street was a hashtag activism campaign, and also. The most famous one, I think, is Black Lives Matter, right? So this idea that you could make a hashtag and people can follow these activists and that it's right there is something that develops around this time. What also develops is like the counter to that, right? So for every great hashtag Black Lives Matter or Occupy Wall Street, for every like good hashtag activism, there are examples of, questionable ones, bad ones. And it begins to get like a moniker of just like, the hashtag activism is like virtue signaling kind of thing. So I think here about Justine Sacco. Do you remember her?
I do.
Yeah, so Justine Sacco was a lady who got on a plane in America and tweeted out a rather off-color racist joke that she was going to Africa. Yeah, she was going to Africa, and she's like, I hope I don't get AIDS. Oh, I'm white. Never mind. So she tweets that out, and by the time she lands in Africa, she had been retweeted thousands of times, and the hashtag has Justine landed yet was trending on Twitter. And so immediately when she landed in Africa, she saw like she had blown up virally. By the way, she only had 200 followers like on Twitter at the time. She had 200 followers. She tweeted into a void, and all of a sudden this firestorm comes back at her, and she loses her job, and she's ostracized, and she gives interviews years later about how this has basically ruined her life, was this one bad tweet. And for as horrible as Justine's tweet was and how bad it was, the outsized response to what happened to her is quite ludicrous. The idea that your entire life is ruined because you made a horrible joke on the internet to 200 followers is an idea that had not existed up until this time. And so these hashtags have the power to really drive this engagement on these things.
And I want
the other big one,
just before you move on to the next one, I think because the examples you gave of there's good hashtag activism and bad hashtag activism, people listening to this will obviously fall on different sides of these issues, and we don't want to kind of like say one set of politics is like right and the other is wrong. What I'm hearing from you, though, is that the difference between something like hashtag has Justine landed yet and hashtag Occupy Wall Street is that one is the Occupy Wall Street or Black Lives Matter, it's lifting up a broad social issue in hopes of fostering dialogue and action, whether on the social front or political front, to address that issue. Whereas Has Justine Landed Yet ends up targeting a person. And the effect of raising up basically a person as a target has those issues like you're talking about, whether or not, like it's like we talked a little bit last time about, she loses her job as a communications director or something like that.
Yeah, she was a communications director. Yeah,
exactly. So like there are repercussions for basically, raising up a racist comment that doesn't really map to her professional status, or it's one thing to let me take that again. it's one thing to tweet out something that's a little bit reprehensible and have personal responsibility and take accountability for what you put out there. It's another thing to have the entire world have that outsized response where it still tracks her to the point of decades later, she's reflecting, like you're saying, that it's impacted her ability to find, a new job, a romantic partner, whatever else like that, because this is the first thing that rises up forever after on this internet history machine. So it's one thing to raise up an issue. It's another thing to target a person, I think is the core difference between good/bad hashtag activism.
Absolutely. There's ways for these hashtags to unite people into a cause for social justice and a social movement. And there's a way for these hashtags to tear down people, right? And to ruin people and to ruin lives for what kind of in the moment is like sadistic voyeurism on the people who are hashtagging out has Justine landed yet? And there's like a little bit of like bloodlust in there that they want to see this person
how far can it be taken
suffer.
Basically.
Yeah, how far can it be taken for somebody? Like the disproportionality of this hashtag activism and the positive and the negative sides of it are were not known in 2014. Now we can look back at them and we can go, oh, that's good, no, that's bad. Like, did Justine face accountability by getting fired? Yeah, she did. Did she face accountability by getting embarrassed? Of course she did. And that's where it should stop. She should be embarrassed and she should be fired. But the fact that, she can't get a job because she has, you Google her name and it comes up with this, right, is just completely wrong. While also those hashtags contain the ability to really unite a group of people against a social cause. And I mean, I'm telling you good and bad because that's my bias as a Democrat, as somebody who's liberal. But regardless of whether or not you think Black Lives Matter or Occupy Wall Street are like fit into your politics or not, I think you can agree that like accountability looks different depending on the situation. And this type of hashtag activism has the ability to really ruin people who have already faced accountability.
What it reminds me of,
my point to it.
What it reminds me of is that social experiment where people are on one side of the glass or another, and they basically have the ability to deliver electric shocks to the person on the other side. And the social experiment showed that people kind of like just kept on hitting the button. When they're given the power to shock another person, they use that power. I remember the caveat to that is there weren't actually shocks coming through. Like the people who were supposed to be receiving the shocks, basically a light went on, they were reacting.
And they were being told.
Yeah.
In the experiment, they were being told that the person wasn't going to get that, like it wasn't going to hurt them. It wasn't going to hurt them at all. So you had an authority figure telling them, yeah, keep doing it. It's fine. And you had a voice recording of the person they thought they were shocking going, oh God, please stop. It hurts so much. And the experiment showed that the people who were doing the shocking will do it when there's an authority figure, right? A doctor or somebody who's administering the study, telling them it's okay, even in the face of evidence that they are getting from the person where they don't. They're saying they're being hurt.
So that gives even a new color to it. Okay.
Yep. Yeah. So,
I don't see any correlation to our present moment at all.
Right. Well, group behavior. I forget the name of the experiment. It's going to kill me. But this idea of groupthink comes into it, right? If I'm it's like professional wrestling. It's like everybody needs a heel, right? If Justine Sacco becomes the heel of the moment and everybody can join in on mocking the heel and like booing the heel, then they will, because it's fun, right? The difference is in professional wrestling, the heel is getting paid a lot of money to get booed at, and Justine is like just a normal person. So the hashtag activism is having its day right now. The other big one, the one that's like, kind of ridiculous now that we look back on it, I put down as cancel Colbert. There are others, but cancel Colbert. The Stephen Colbert Show made a tweet in 2014 in March, and it was off color. It was a character that he used to do mocking the Asian community. and it was called Ching Chong Ding Dong. And he tweeted out, the show tweeted out, um, and I'm quoting here, I am willing to show hashtag Asian community I care by introducing the Ching Chong Ding Dong Foundation for Sensitivity to Orientals or whatever. And it's Stephen Colbert. It's a Colbert show, so it's like his character was a mocking, like conservative people. So his defense was, "Oh, I'm mocking the people who would actually say something like this seriously," which was like a common defense back in the time. Now that we kind of know, like, maybe you shouldn't say it either way. But there was an activist named Sui Park who tweeted out, we should hashtag cancel Colbert. And that gets retweeted a whole bunch of times. And actually, backlash comes back against Park rather than Colbert. And people start, threatening Sui Park's life. And they start doxing her and they start, harassing her, which if you've caught a theme from these two that like the internet reacts really harshly towards women, you would be completely correct in noticing that theme. But this kind of comes up, and the idea that just like even responding and calling somebody out in a hashtag activist way can still kind of come back and hurt you. So this is the world in 2014 that Gamergate is kind of stepping into. And so there's this hashtag activist side that's going on. And then there's your favorite term, Operation Lollipop.
Operation Lollipop.
Operation Lollipop is a reaction to this. So people probably haven't heard of Operation Lollipop because it is kind of, under the radar of stuff, right? So I'm going to quote a BuzzFeed article here because it defines it. So, quote, Operation Lollipop is a propaganda campaign run largely by members of the men's rights and pickup artist communities. The idea is to pose as women of color on Twitter and guide activist hashtags as a way to embarrass the online social justice community. Right, so men's rights activists and pickup artists, who are two groups in the red pill manosphere, are coming up here. And so what these guys did is they would start making up parody hashtags that sounded like they were something that social justice warriors, right, those blue-haired, scary feminists that every white man is afraid of, like something that it parodies their speech and things that they might do. So the big one was End Father's Day. So it was a Twitter hashtag that these in Operation Lollipop that these men made up, where they were trying to pose as feminists, saying that we need to end Father's Day. So they made sock puppet accounts with this, right? So they would make an account. It would have, one or two followers. It would tweet like one time. And there's a screen grab I have on here that I'll read. It says hashtag End Father's Day because fathers shouldn't be given credit for the mother's work, right? It's one of those things that's like, you think about it, you look at it, you're like, oh my God, that's like a really radical feminist kind of thing to say. And then you think about it for more than 2 seconds and you're like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, why would anybody care about this? But they used that hashtag and put it out there and pumped it with a bunch of sock puppet accounts that it got to be trending on Twitter. They made this hashtag go trending on Twitter. And as soon as they got it trending and it was in the top mentions, well, now actually serious people come in. So they actually were blue-haired feminist types that come in here and go, yeah, absolutely, 100%, End Father's Day, right? So they start pumping it up because they think it's coming from their side. And then you get the other side that's coming in and saying, that's horrible, that's so dumb. And then you get a third side of people coming in and saying, this is all a hoax. Like, here, this is all a hoax. Here are the posts from 4chan that say, we're going to create this thing and we're going to do this, but it's completely fake. And that gets lost in all of this. So the truth kind of gets lost and it gets muddied. And what you have is this conversation between these two polarized sides going on that the media, the actual media picks up on. So Fox News picks up on this. And there are Fox and Friends episodes from just after this hashtag was released that talk about it as a real thing. Right, they talk about it and they say, oh my God, these feminists are doing this and they're pumping up their base, right? They're pumping up all old Fox News viewers who don't know anything about the internet. And so these old people are seeing this and think it's real, and then they go on their Facebook and tweet about it, and it just becomes this huge manufactured hurricane type storm that goes for a little bit, goes for a couple days, and then goes away. Right? Time Magazine even adds in one of their articles for Father's Day, adds the hashtag End Father's Day on it because this hashtag had come in. So it's interesting around this time, men, especially in these areas of like 4chan and 8chan, are figuring out how to manufacture this virality, especially by capitalizing on the other side, like perceived fears of the other side, right? I can make my side really mad and really angry on these social justice warriors over here. I'll just pretend to be them. And then the other side is doing the same thing, but on the other side. And it's creating media out of nothing, which is just something that I don't think has ever happened before, right? For this time. Like there has to be an actual story. But the media in the social media age, like the actual legacy media, is more in tune to cover conversations now. They're covering like what does the left say and what does the right say, rather than like what actually is happening, which is it's a fucking hoax. It's a hoax.
I would say
we all know it's a.
I cut you off. Sorry.
No, you go ahead. I'm pretty much done.
That is pretty much what all news coverage is these days. It's not even about like what actual things are happening. It's about what so-and-so said, what so-and-so said, what so-and-so said. Yeah, that was kind of a non sequitur, I guess. But like,
no, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. It is more about covering the conversation. It's like covering the lunchroom conversation at a high school rather than covering like what's actually going on, because that gets more clicks, that gets more money, that drives more traffic, right? If you talk about what everybody is saying about it rather than talking about the thing itself, and that becomes very important in Gamergate, right? So, all right, we're in 2014. I kind of wanted to take a little detour. I hope the listener can follow us here and talk about like what's happening in gaming in 2014. And I want to put a big disclaimer on this that Nathaniel and I are not gamers. I'm not. I don't want to even be seen as being credible in the gaming community because this is reporting on what I think is kind of happening based on podcasts and things that I've read. But this world is also so small and also so specific that I'm probably gonna get a couple things wrong. But I want to stay high level and go, this is what I understand is kind of happening in this community and what is leading. Like the logs are being stacked for this fire in this community, and here's what the logs are. Is kind of my point. So 2014, gaming is actually coming out of, as a hobby, is coming out of like its golden era, right? The era you and I graduated from college in 2006, and so like 2006 to like 2012, 13 is like the golden era, a gold standard for a lot of gamers, right? You have Halo during this time. 2014 was the whole Destiny craze. I remember the Destiny craze. Call of Duty, like all of those games where you shoot and kill people are like having a heyday. And this is a lot of young men are growing up playing these games and they're finding community in these games, right? They're making friends in this space. Like they are playing great games and having a great time doing it, right? So they're becoming more and more of a lucrative market, right? If you go and look at some of these games and how much money these fucking games make and continue to make every month, right? Through subscriptions and through microtransactions, like there is so much money being spent by these gamers, and these game developers are making money hand over fist. It puts like Hollywood to fucking shame how much money these games make versus like a movie, right? So things like product placements are starting to happen inside games, right? You buy the latest game, and all of a sudden it's I think Halo had like Mountain Dew Code Red or something, like was sponsored like when it first came out. Yeah, and so like different businesses and different things are starting to show up inside games. So like there's this idea that gamers are getting
so
where
awful.
they're like I am just watching an advertisement. Like I'm being marketed to after I already paid for this $60 game. And that's sitting with them a little weird, right? And I mentioned microtransactions before. Microtransactions, if you're not a gamer, are those things where, like, if you play games on your phone, right? Every so often, a little notification will pop up and it'll say, buy this for 99 cents or buy this for $3 or whatever that is. And a small thing, and you might go, that's fine. And so you buy it. Well, that's starting to show up in AAA games, right? Starting to show up in like the games you pay $60 and $70 for. You're sitting down and open them up, and all of a sudden they want you to spend $5 on this armor that's going to take you, 40 hours to get otherwise, when you can have it now for $3. Right. And so they're starting to get a lot of those show up in games too. So gamers are feeling like a wallet with legs. It's like the best way I can describe it. And so they're starting to get a little bit resentful of these large game developers taking advantage of them. So out of that kind of rises this indie game movement that starts in the early 2010s, right? Where you have a bunch of people who are, not AAA developers. They're individuals, they're small teams, and they're making games that don't cost as much, that are pretty good, and that are available for purchase on Twitch and Steam and all this kind of stuff. And so they're buying. The gamers are starting to buy these games, starting to get a taste for them. So what that's doing is expanding the game market, right? Most AAA game titles are very war-oriented, men-oriented, right? If you think of the big ones, right? Call of Duty and Halo and Assassin's Creed and all these different things, they all have a lot of themes in common. And what it mostly is like murdering as many people as possible.
At what point did video games focus so prominently on that? Was it there from the get-go, like the first video games? I'm thinking like Atari and shit, but like...
Yeah, to some degree, those have always been popular, right? I mean, going back to my childhood, I remember when GoldenEye was a thing, right? When you got to the first-person shooter multiplayer type of game, and how popular that was when I was a kid. And the popularity is like, it's really there, right? This market of men really like these video games. And there is nothing wrong with liking these video games or playing these video games. It's what's sold. It's what sold the most. It's what sold the fastest. It's what sold the best. So these companies just still do it, right?
I would be interested maybe in a future episode digging down the rabbit hole of like putting men in the perspective of a soldier, because you're talking about these games sold well, so they keep on getting made. That's somewhat of a feed the beast mentality, similar as how you're talking about internet stuff. It'd be interesting to think through how becoming first-place shooter or first-person shooter, it does kind of fly in the face of, I'm going to keep on going back to this same broken record. It reduces empathy for people, to like basically like death.
Well, yeah, and this is a different episode altogether, so I don't want to get stuck here. But this Behind the Bastards episode I just listened to talked about, how does this translate into these mass murders, mass shooters, right? A lot of these guys now are streaming these things on Twitch and on gaming platforms. They're wearing first-person. They're wearing cameras, so they're going from a first-person view, and they're streaming out. Like, this is all like coming directly from video games. Like, you get this pipeline to a couple people who have horrible impulses, and then they're using the language of video games to communicate those horrible impulses back to the men that are their audience and their friends in these games, right? Wow. Totally different podcast and totally different episode. I'm not qualified to talk about that. But when you see that link and you go, oh, I see why we are where we are all of a sudden, right? But at this time, right, this is gaming. And into this steps these indie developers that are starting to make different types of games. It's not necessarily like completely like off the wall, like experimental video games, but they offer a different experience, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. That's capitalism, right? There's a little bit of a market niche. There are people out there who are gamers who don't want to play Halo all the time, who don't want to play, Call of Duty all the time. So these indie developers are filling that need, and that market is growing. Right, it's in an era where indie games are thriving, and people are starting to invest a lot of time in that. Well, just like any other market, right? I'm a AAA game developer. I'm a huge development studio. I'm Ubisoft or whatever. And I look at this and I go, oh, I can also do that. Right. So where these other games start to feature a little bit more diversity in characters, they start to feature a little bit less maybe violence, right? Ubisoft. Now I can make a game that has, diversity and is very inclusive, that is a little bit outside the box, right? And the reaction from these men, and you can go back and read, you know, early 4chan posts, early about Gamergate, where they talk about, right, this infusion, this forcing of diversity, equity, and inclusion in these video games is ruining their space. And if they don't have a space where they can be themselves, right now they're victims. Something is being taken away from them. And it's like, bro, they didn't stop making Halo. They didn't stop making Call of Duty. Those games are still as popular as ever. It's just now you got to make a little room for a game with a female protagonist character, and you react so piss poor, and that's not a thing that's unique to Gamergate. Like
The
women
male-only
coming
space.
into men's spaces and men reacting like little shits, right? And so this is just that flavor of it. But that's where these men kind of go with it, right? So there's that industry thing, right? That's the industry, and also at the same time in this era, games are becoming pieces of art, right? I remember vividly playing like Mario Brothers and my dad coming in and seeing that I was playing Mario Brothers as like a 7-year old and was like, go outside, right? You need to go outside. And that I think was a major narrative for anybody like in our elder millennial type of generation, where it was like go outside because our parents didn't play video games. They don't know these things. These things are taking up time inside when they played outside. So go outside. But what ends up happening once we grow up and we become the parents, is that we walk in and see our son playing a cool video game when he's 7, and we go, we want to play too, right? And so now parents are playing video games with their kids, and these video games are becoming more and more advanced in both like their gameplay and also their graphics, and they're quite like beautiful in some places, and they're really good. They're really good pieces of art. And so there's a little bit of an idea from the gamers that like, okay, you used to hate our video games. You used to tell us to go outside. And now you're seeing them and you're thinking they're cool, which means like we're ascendant, right? We are going to be ascendant in this culture. We are going to go from nerds who you think are in their basement for no reason to people who are like this high quality art, and we're going to be cool, right? So in 2014,
You're saying gamers are thinking that?
yeah. There are. I was reading an article, and I'll put it in the show notes because I don't know where it is now. But it was like, basically like, hey, look, these, we've been shit on our entire lives. We're playing these little kids' toys, right? These video games, and now people think that our kids' toys are cool. So I can imagine there being gamers out there who go into this Gamergate thing where they start getting blamed for harassment campaigns and start getting called incels and start getting called all those names again, and they're fucking pissed about it because they're like, now we're cool. And this coolness is being taken away from us by all these women and all this diversity and equity and stuff. We're being told that the games that we thought were cool, all of these first person shooters and these violent games, are wrong and bad and we're toxic and blah, blah, blah. So it's a way where it's like they've taken away the ascendance of our hobby.
So if
Does that
I
make
can,
sense?
I'm having a little trouble following, so I want to package it back. It sounds like what you're saying is that games are having a heyday. They're becoming more and more artful in how they're made. At the same time, there's some influx of marketing and product placement and microtransactions that are kind of monetizing a space that that is a core hobby and therefore identity marker for a certain subset of the population. As games become more mainstream, the ones who were kind of like the OG gamers are feeling more a little bit of acceptance, but also some some complexity there because games are changing for potentially what they would call the worst now that they're being accepted because of things like diversity, equity, inclusion coming in, because of microtransactions, because of all this stuff. So the second that their unique little corner of the world is becoming more mainstream, it's being changed, and therefore their identity is perceived to be under attack. Is that kind of like the point that you're looking to make?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Roger Ebert is the guy, the article I was trying to think of. The movie critic, wrote a blog post called Games Can Never Be Art, right? Where he goes through and he talks about how video games are great, they're nice, neat, they're toys, but they can never be art. A lot of gamers actually read that and they're like, oh, this is kind of shit. Like we know that these are art pieces. We know that these are great things. And now that those are being changed a little bit, and their type of video game is not getting that they're still not being seen as art. These gamers kind of feel, again, it just inflames that idea that people are against them, right? I'm trying to paint this more as like this is where their victim mentality comes from, right? Is that people aren't taking them seriously. People aren't looking at the things they do as cool when they really should be. Like, they like what we're doing, and they still don't think that we are cool, and they look for someone to blame. And they point towards diversity, equity, inclusion. They point towards these game developers that they already hate, shoving this shit down their throat that they don't like, and then telling them this is what a gamer is.
One thing that you haven't touched on yet is that during this time, these game developers are also kind of in league with game journalism. So Roger Ebert is a little bit outside of that world, but they're basically paying reviewers to give good reviews. So there isn't really clear objectivity within the sphere.
Yes. So that's the next section I was about to go into.
Okay.
It's exactly what you said. So the gaming press during all of this is another kind of leg on this stool where so the gaming press in 2014, I'm going to use heavy air quotes on gaming press. It seems to be more like a dozen people on a group chat together there's a very small pool of people who are actually legitimately writing about the gaming community. The gaming press has grown since then. It's become more legitimate, but it's still relatively small. But in 2014, it was like fledgling. And what the gaming press basically was a marketing arm of these large developers. So these large developers were going to the quote unquote game critics and saying, play this game. We want a good review of this game, because if you give us a good review of this game, then we'll sell more units of this game, right? So these gamers were talking to these the gaming press was talking to the gaming community, and were seen as giving positive reviews of these games way more than not. There wasn't like serious artistic critique going on. It was just trying to convince you to buy the game. And so gamers were starting to feel this as well. There was a controversy in 2014. It was around the game. It was Middle-earth: Shadows of Mordor. So it was a Lord of the Rings game. And the gaming community basically found out that a lot of these articles and these reviews that the press was putting out were
paid for.
Not paid for, but heavily influenced by the game developers. So the gaming journalists were basically parroting what the game developers were telling them to say. So there's this idea as a gamer where it's like, I have to buy your game, right? You put out this game. I can't even go anywhere. If I want to play these games with my friends, I have to buy your game. I can't even go to a third party to give me what I would consider a trustworthy review of this game, because they're in your pocket as well. And after I buy your game for $60 that might suck, I then have to keep spending more money to get these items inside the game. Like, again, wallet with legs is the best way that these gamers feel, right? And it feeds that victim mentality. It feeds their just perceived persecution because these large corporations are against them. And so there's hatred and resentment growing towards the game developers, growing towards the critics, and growing towards the press about the games, right? that's where we are in 2014. So we are primed in this community that again is very online. It's very young. It's very male, right? So we know these spaces. Like these are guys who are good with technology. These are guys who know who know online spaces. So that they find that community in there, and they're really in the shadows, right? If you're on 4chan and you're in 8chan and you're in a video game community, right? Like, right, you're not very visible to the public world that's going on. You're kind of by yourself, and you're just kind of, if you're in this persecution state, like you're like just festering there online.
I want to
So
pause right there on the victim
yeah,
mentality for one second, because as you were just talking, this image kind of came to me where it's like, back in the day, I don't think men were decrying their victim state when they had to go outside the cave to fight a saber-toothed tiger. And that brought me back to the original thing you said, which is, in this day and age, when it's harder to be a provider, when it's harder to be a protector, when neither of those roles necessarily fit or are expected or needed anymore, men's identity and purpose is tied to their hobby, basically, which in some ways is like a vanilla down version of a role they could have. It's almost like you spend most of your time either, at work behind a, whatever work you have, whether it's blue collar or white collar, you spend your time making money. Whatever time you don't spend making money and attending to any responsibilities you have, you're finding your niche, your sense of self in these hobbies, which is kind of a neither here nor there thing. Like, it's great to have a hobby. You and I both have them. But, like, the role that you have in the world isn't necessarily fulfilled by executing that hobby well. So, tying back to the state of this industry with the role of... Let me try to package this. So tying that back to what you're calling the cultural soup and what's going on in these gamers' lives, where they feel under attack because their hobby, the world of their hobby, is changing. They can't trust the quote-unquote authorities to tell them the truth. They are being seen as wallet with legs. They're being told that more diversity is needed in their space. They're being told that the world that is theirs to occupy needs to change, and they need to change with it without their input. I could understand why such outrage festers, because there's nowhere else to put that energy or get that immediate feedback, that validation of what it is to be themselves, other than this world that they've retreated to, that is now taking on a life of its own, becoming more mainstream and changing from under their feet. There's no real way they can go outside the cave and slay a saber-toothed tiger to protect their horde. There's nowhere for them to go except to feel like they are the victim or feel that outrage that things are changing beyond their control. So that's neither here nor there, but victim mentality is just like, it's
I think that's very relevant. Yeah, I think that's very relevant. I think that explains, you can kind of draw the line in your mind now between men who feel this way and MAGA, right? You can.
And it's like the country is changing. The country is changing under our feet too. Yeah.
Yeah. And the fact that it's an army of angry young men, right? Steve Bannon called it that at some point, that these Gamergaters were an army of angry young men that he figured out how to channel into political action. But you could see where all of this is kind of coming into place, right? From the crisis of masculinity to the loneliness epidemic to not being able to be a provider or a protector and only having these type of like hobbies that can be your identity, which again is not a bad thing, but you can see where all of this was taken and twisted by a couple people who we'll get to here in a second. So, okay, Gamergate itself, right? So this is 2014. This is August. I am not going to mention the names of some of these people. I have had a change of heart. The first two times we recorded this, I talked about who they were. I don't think I'm going to, because their name is already so over the internet and so horrible.
You mean the targets?
You can easily go find who these targets were. But some of the stuff that was done to them just makes it like I don't want to put their names back out there. So,
Got it. So they were women. We'll just say they were women. They were targeted.
One of them, one game developer now does identify as non-binary. At the time, she identified as a woman, so I'll probably use she for her, but just so everybody knows. An indie game developer comes along in 2014 and develops a game called Depression Quest. It is like I said, an indie game. It's a throwback to like text-based games on old school computers if you used to play those, if you're of a certain age. And she develops this game, and it's about teaching people how to do what it's like to live with depression. Right? It's an art piece more than it is a game. It is not meant to be a like sell $1 million worth of gaming stuff. It is really simply a thing that she puts out to kind of like explore this idea of what a game can be.
It was put out for free
And
too. You said, right?
yeah, so free. It was free, but it was also like pay what you can or pay what you want kind of thing.
There are
So
microtransactions.
yeah, or more just like recouping some of the cost of their time and their and what they used to make the game, but it was not a profit making endeavor. So she releases this game. It's called Depression Quest. It releases on Steam on August 14th of 2014, and 2 days later on August 16th, 2014, her ex-boyfriend releases a post on the internet that basically just it's a shit post. It's one of those like I see it now that some of my friends are getting divorced where they'll just post like I'm so glad that I finally am free blah 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 on Facebook, and you're like, oh my god, that's what this guy did. And he just slams her for allegedly sleeping with 5 men who were part of the game, who are game developers and part of the gaming press, in exchange for positive reviews of her free game, which is already ludicrous on its face. There is no evidence that the two exchanged those things. They did have a relationship previously, and apparently he did. The
You're
reporter
talking
did
about like a
mention
reporter
her.
gave her a positive review, and then the
Yeah,
boyfriend's
there is
the
no
ex-boyfriend.
evidence.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is no evidence that it was in exchange for sex. And he apparently did mention her in an article at some point, but had nothing to do with Depression Quest. So just on its face, I want to just present the idea that like these gamers are coming in bad faith to all this shit. They are making shit up where it's not, and there's nothing there. But so the gamers are already primed, right? They hate developers, they hate the gaming press, and they've already been primed to kind of hate critics as well from a different game critic a couple years before, who made a bunch of YouTube videos chronicling like women's role in video games at the time and presented like a critique of it. They already hate all of these types of ideas and this and what's going on, that's the match that strikes up Gamergate. And there are there's a reaction from a lot of gamers that like to this post that like, see, I knew all these women were the problem anyway. See, I knew that all this shit's being shoved down our throat. Our space is being taken away. And so they launch an online harassment campaign against this developer and begin doxing her, and they begin swatting her. They called in bomb threats when she was supposed to speak at certain places. Like they just go to make her life a living absolute hell. Now, from this, there are content creators. Do you know David Pakman? He's a pretty popular YouTuber. He's a left guy. He's a progressive. Had a show. The show was just starting up in 2014, and he's one of the early adopters of this of Gamergate. He starts covering Gamergate rather early and starts to notice that, hey, I'm actually monetizing off of this content, right? I'm getting these gamers as a captive audience because I'm the only one talking about it, and his channel begins to grow and he begins to monetize off of this. So he has people on from both sides of this community. He's got gamers on that are claiming this is a campaign against ethics in game journalism and stopping this collusion they see between developers and journalists. And he has people on the other side who are like, this is very clearly a harassment campaign. But what he's doing by getting all this content and getting all this views and getting this money for it is creating a market with other content creators. And he wasn't the only first one. There are a lot of early adopters. He's just the most famous one that some of our listeners might know. And so he is making money off of this content. It's signaling other content creators to begin making this content. And all of these early creators kind of all agree that this is a harassment campaign and these gamers should stop. And they come down very hard on the side of the gamers. There's gaming press articles that are also written early on in this that say that gamers are dead, that this type of harassment campaign is just about the little boys and these guys are horrible and they're awful, and they just start shitting on these gamers who already feel shit on, who want nothing more than to, like, they are perpetual victims in their mind with what's going on, even though they're the ones doing all this harassment. But that's how they're feeling. And into this fray steps our best friends of the pod, Steve Bannon and Milo Yiannopoulos with Breitbart.com. So,
Ding.
Nathaniel,
Yeah.
what do you know about Steve Bannon? What do you know about Milo Yiannopoulos? What do you know about Breitbart? For our listeners who, for some lucky reason, have no idea who they are.
So you're asking me about Steve Bannon and Milo Yiannopoulos. Until we recorded, I really didn't know the extent to which they played a role in Gamergate. But I think that the big too long didn't read version is that Steve Bannon kind of came on the scene with Breitbart as this kind of more activated, unhinged Fox News online network that proved really instrumental in Trump's first election and went on to become, part of that administration. Milo Yiannopoulos I knew less of, but from what I understand from you, was more like a journalist for hire who could kind of
Troll
spin
for hire,
things,
yeah.
troll for hire, who could kind of spin different outrages with a really adept pen. So why don't you bring it all home for us, Papa Bear, and tell us who these guys are?
So Steve Bannon was in the first Trump administration, and he grew out of Breitbart, right? And so Steve Bannon has this online online news site, right-wing news site called Breitbart, right? And up until this point, Breitbart really resembled more like Fox News, right? Like, it was very conservative, but it was like old person conservative. It didn't really go into these like social issues that the young people were dealing with, right? And he brings on a young writer named Milo Yiannopoulos. And Milo Yiannopoulos is British and he's gay, and he's very, very, very good at being a troll online. He's good for a couple reasons. One, I can't believe I'm going to say this. He's a really funny writer. I don't want to give Milo
Is he an
Yiannopoulos credit
inspiration?
for anything. What's that?
He's your inspiration?
Yes, that's me. No, he's actually really funny. He's got a gift for writing, and he also has a gift for just very sarcastic, horrible humor. It also, I think, helps a little bit that he's gay, because he kind of gets some cover from, like, left-wing people can't go and say, like, look at these horrible, conservative, awful straight men doing this shit. He gets a little bit of cover for his horrible opinions by the fact that you can't really come out and say, look at these horrible straight white people. He can be like, well, I'm gay, and I think
Would
that
you
gay people are
say
horrible.
that he is a walking, talking, breathing embodiment of Operation Lollipop?
Yeah, to a degree. Yeah, definitely to a degree in terms of like the trolliness aspect to it. But so Milo comes to Breitbart, and um, one of the things he notices is this new Gamergate controversy that's happening, and how these gamers are feeling. He pinpoints it directly. He's like, they're freaking, they're persecuted. They're a persecuted young group of angry people, and everyone is shitting on them right now and telling them they're to stop this harassment campaign. Well, and they're monetizing off of that content, right? And he goes, well, the world is polarized right now. We understand this now, that, like, hey, polarized content drives engagement, and engagement drives money, et cetera, et cetera. So he goes, instead of, going and adding our voice to this, these young men are harassing these women. Let's take the opposite stance. Let's go in and be supportive of them. So he begins writing articles on Breitbart about this really is about ethics in game journalism. These guys have a point. They are right. People need to listen to these men about these horrible feminists coming in, taking their space, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that has exactly the effect that you think it would nowadays, which is that drives engagement to Breitbart. That drives money to Breitbart. And the more money that drives to this website, the more the Steve Bannon and Milo Yiannopoulos keep covering it in this opposite way. And so now you have all this other side telling these young gamers that they're horrible people and stop this harassment campaign. And you got these couple bastions of like freedom, right? The free speech, right? You can say what you want. All this shit comes in, and they are also making a lot of money off of the other side of it. Well, Steve Bannon, if you know anything about his media strategy, he called it flood the zone with shit. And flood the zone with shit just means if there's a news story, if you can muddy the waters between what's true and what's not, if we go out there and just keep saying that this is about ethics in game journalism, well, the average person who's looking at this is going to go, I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. When it's very clearly a harassment campaign, it's very clearly horrible things that these young men are doing. But that doesn't become the story. The story instead becomes, is it about ethics in game journalism? Is it about harassment? We'll never know. And the media continues to just cover the conversation between the two sides rather than actually fucking investigating and getting to the root of it, which is what their job is. So this, Steve Bannon recognizes this, and I said it a little earlier, and I'll say it again. He has a direct quote. He is quoted as saying, I'm taking this army of young men and getting them into the alt-right through Gamergate, and then can expose them to the other conspiracies, to the other right-wing alt-right views that are on my website and that are on others as well. So
where did he say
Steve,
that?
I'll put it in the show notes. It is.
I'm just amazed at the transparency factor because, like, we're recording this.
Hang on, I'll look it up right now because that is a good one.
There's something to be said for just telegraphing what your intentions are, which is in a really weird way proving really effective. We're recording this episode in October 2025, and the amount of things coming out of the administration where it is saying truly outlandish, illegal, hurtful things, but the fact that it's being said out loud is almost just taken as though it's normal. And people certainly are on one side, raising hands and saying like, this is bad. But then the things get done anyways. And just the fact of telegraphing these bad intentions seems to somehow, I don't know where I'm going with that. Fuck it.
You're fine. Okay, here it is. So this is from a USA Today quote that quotes Steve Bannon about Gamergate, and the quote is, he's talking about Milo Yiannopoulos. He said, "I realized Milo could connect with these kids right away." Bannon told Green, "You can activate that army. They come in through Gamergate or whatever, and then get turned onto politics and Trump." That's a direct quote from Steve Bannon. So it's like he knew what he was doing. He had a vision and a plan for these young men. He saw them both as monetization for Breitbart, right? Clicks on ads. And he also saw them as a political force that could be harnessed and utilized. And so Steve Bannon really took, while a lot of these content creators, early ones especially, took Gamergate content to make money, Steve Bannon saw it as money, and he also saw it as power, right? Who the fuck was Steve Bannon before 2016? Nobody fucking knew about him. And now all of a sudden he's in the White House, and now he's got huge influence in the alt-right and the political right community. Like, he has all of that, and he knew what he was doing. He saw this as an opportunity when nobody else could really see it there.
One thing I'll touch on right there is that this whole thing, the whole the whole gamer community that was on the side of feeling outraged, feeling victimized, feeling like they were being manipulated and made to do things on behalf of diversity, equity, inclusion, understanding, like whatever else. They feel like they are victims. And here's someone that they can, like, if they read the same quote that you did, see they are actually being manipulated towards certain behavior and made to feel a certain way and go towards certain beliefs and be made money from, and like all these things. And I don't know what it takes to make 1 + 1 = 2 as opposed to anything else, but like they it doesn't factor in. Like, they would rather still feel the outrage even when somebody is coming up saying like, I am actively using them in this way.
Well, I'm not saying that this is what they're thinking, but I can definitely get the idea of like, well, I got side A over here who's manipulating me and who I feel like are evil people and or who I feel like are using me, right? And they're taking and they're shitting on me. And I got this other side over here who maybe I know that they're using me. Yeah, I see the Steve Bannon quote, and yeah, I agree with it. He is using me to vote for Trump so that he can get into power, but he says nice things. And so,
So
those
if
are my two
everybody,
options.
it's the same as flood the zone with shit. If everybody's manipulating me, then I'll
I'm
just
going to
go
go
with
with the one that tells me I'm a good guy. Yeah, yeah, of course, of course. I don't know if that's what they're thinking directly, but I can definitely see me justifying that logic if I had been in this right here. So, okay, one more thing. So Gamergate right now is still at like a medium boil. Breitbart is a small website at this time. These people are making money off of this stuff, but it gets eventually catapulted up into the mainstream press. The legacy media gets a hold of it too. And it gets there in part through hashtag campaigns, but back with hashtag activism, like we talked about it before, right? So that end Father's Day, that Operation Lollipop, same guys, Operation Lollipop starts a hashtag called hashtag not your shield. And what that is aimed at doing is these gamers are starting to see that like the majority of people are still against them, right? They see this harassment and they're not willing to like overlook it, even if it is for something that would be considered a valid thing, these men are losing their space, right? So the men realize they got to do some counter programming to this. So what they do is they go make a bunch of sock puppet Twitter accounts. Again, who are posing kind of like SJW, scary feminist, blue haired types, right? And hey, hold on one second. The cat's meowing, and I'm gonna put him away. Hold on. I don't know how he got out, but all right, let me take that again. All right, so what ends up happening with all of this is, I forgot where I started with it.
not your shield.
Yeah, but I mean, how I got into not your shield. So, so one more thing with all of this is, this idea of hashtag activism kind of comes back up at this point too, right? And so we're still in the beginnings of Gamergate in terms of a timeline. We're still in September and October of 2014. And the the main or the predominant opinion is that these men are conducting a harassment campaign against these women and they need to stop. Right. And the men are kind of realizing this, that they're looking bad. And so they start a hashtag activism campaign called hashtag not your shield. And it's the same Operation Lollipop guys. They get in there and they go on 4chan and they say, we're going to start this hashtag. I want everybody to kind of create these sock puppet accounts on Twitter. We want them to code in like an SJW, scary, blue-haired feminist kind of way and want to parody that vibe. And we want them to be minorities as well. So go on there and your sock puppet account should be from people of ethnic minorities or LGBTQ minorities. And you should claim to be a gamer. So you can say, I'm a person of color and I'm a gamer, and I agree that this is about ethics in game journalism. I will not be hashtag not your shield, right? I'm not going to be brought into your left-wing social justice propaganda. I believe this is Gamergate is about ethics in game journalism. So they created a bunch of sock puppet accounts that pumped up that hashtag, and they would use hashtag not your shield in conjunction with hashtag Gamergate, which fed the Twitter algorithm and got those hashtags trending and made it appear to the average Twitter user that there was some backlash to this harassment campaign, right? That this was, again, more muddy waters that you can understand. So you can't really go ahead and blame these guys for harassing these women. You don't know the full story, average person out there. There are two sides to this. When if you looked into it for even 2 seconds, you would see that these Twitter accounts had like 3 followers and only tweeted like twice and looked into yesterday and were created like yesterday. But that wasn't a thing we did in 2014. Like now we kind of understand, like, okay, I can see if an account like this is making a claim, I'm not going to pay attention to it. But back then you couldn't. And so it created a counter programming thing and made this whole thing really muddy. So by the time that Gamergate actually was getting covered by the New York Times and by MSNBC and by other like legacy media outlets, the story really was like, well, this group says this and this group says this, and we'll never know, right? And that is echoed throughout MAGA in terms of their playbook still today, right? Again, Steve Bannon's strategy of flood the zone with shit. You just make everything so muddy that nobody can kind of figure it out. Nobody feels like they can figure it out. And then you move on to the next controversy, right? You give yourself cover to move on to your next horrible thing or the next group you want to out, right? So I want to mention hashtag not your shield because it's that idea of hashtag activism and Operation Lollipop coming back into this. So they are there together. All right, dude. So that's all I want to cover with Gamergate in terms of what it actually is, like what happened. What I do want to say is, or talk about a little bit, is like we see how this is going in culture right now, right? We could see how the MAGA uses these same strategies of now it's kind of morphed into like this idea of nut picking, where like you find the liberal who has like the most extreme opinion on something possible, and so extreme that like even other liberals look at them and go, that person's a little weird. And you clip them on TikTok or you clip them on Instagram and they're saying the weirdest thing. And then you present the picture that everybody thinks that. All liberals think that. I'm thinking of Libs of TikTok here, that account where she fucking clips any liberal crazy person that codes as scary to a conservative person and makes it seem like everybody holds that opinion. And we can bring back in Sydney Sweeney at this point to say like, this again is what they did with Sydney Sweeney, is like any article that I read about Sydney Sweeney at the time that it was going on would say some shit like leftists online are saying, or some Democrats think. And I was just sitting there going, fucking who? Who's saying that? They'd never give an example of someone saying that. There are plenty of examples of like J.D. Vance and people high up in the Trump administration that respond to that and are saying, look at these liberals and look at this and look at that. So like, I don't know how you fight a war or a messaging war, I should say. I don't know how you fight a messaging war that is like, how do we defend shit we're not saying? You know? And
yeah, finish your point.
No, keep going.
The place that my mind goes to is outside the realm of online controversy, straight into aftermath of Charlie Kirk, because one person decided to commit an act of violence, and it's been cited at the highest levels as evidence that there is a liberal conspiracy that wants to destroy American way of life, and justification for cracking down on what is free speech as a defender, quote unquote, of free speech. So the misdirection, the redirection, and the things that can be seen with muddying the waters with Gamergate are being employed right now to take that victim mentality and create very real unrest and reprisal.
Yeah, it's more nut picking with Charlie Kirk again, right? It's like, do I believe that there are some dumb people who are on the political left in some way that are saying stupid things about a guy who got assassinated? Yeah, I do. It's a big fucking country. There are 350 million of us. There's somebody out there with a dumb opinion. And now that person with a dumb opinion has can talk into their box of screams and project that to everybody. Um, but that doesn't mean that person's serious. It doesn't mean we take them seriously. I heard nobody, unlike Democratic leadership or any Democrat that has an elected office that's like significant in any way, say anything like that. But the picture that MAGA presents is that they're all saying that.
Let's even
what they
beyond what
make.
they say. It's I was talking specifically about the gunman that actually did it, just citing as evidence one nut. Like, yeah, you're talking about nut picking,
Well, and
taking
also
the most
muddying
extreme.
it. Yeah. Also muddying it to be like, okay, this guy definitely is a leftist and is a Democrat and is all of that. And I'm like, I don't think that guy agrees with the Democratic Party. I'm not saying he might not be politically left. I'm just saying from what I know about that guy, like, is there evidence that he's a Democrat? I I don't see any in terms of that. I see that he is, it could be it's Utah. His entire family is conservative. He looks like he fell in love with somebody who was trans, and maybe that made him rethink some of the things that a person that he had grown up with, like Charlie Kirk, the things that that person said against trans people. And it's like, and he went crazy and he went psycho and took it to a horrible place. That is a much more likely story, but it's not a left-right story. And it's like to be seen as we are condoning that violence on the left, or making it seem like we do, is such a harmful idea, right? It's so bad. When like the irony that you have the fucking president of the United States right now, who's like who advocates for so much violence against anybody who's not a MAGA person, and then coming out and saying, how dare they condone violence against us? You're like, number one, that's not real. And number two, what the fuck are you talking about? So
The justification of bad behavior is current through all of this.
what do you mean by that?
I mean that by flooding the zone and muddying the waters, any spectators who would look at Gamergate and say, why is this man online choosing to enact actions of hatred against a woman he's never met on the other side of the country? Why is he taking time out of his day to actively make someone else's life bad? And by the time you get through all the mixed messaging, you think that it might somehow be weirdly justified because his identity is under attack, because she's an embodiment of a larger problem, because she stops being a person and starts being an embodiment of something that needs to be fought hard upon. And in that same way, and if there's muddied waters, then the average spectator doesn't know how to make head or tails of anything, and so they just move on to the next controversy, so to speak. And so that action that's taking place is still happening and doesn't get called to account and seen as one person actively influencing another's day.
Yeah, it seems like
and feeling of safety. And just to finish the point, like
Yeah, go ahead.
In the example we're talking about, which is more modern day, the more that people stop being seen as people, the easier it is to return to that social experiment, the easier it is to shock them on the other side of the glass. If an authority figure is telling you, don't worry, this is justified, or this doesn't have the impact you might otherwise think. And it makes what, if you were left to your own devices, seem like an incomprehensible action to take, and gives the cloak of justification or victimization, justified response to victimization to it. Then terrible things happen and it feels warm and fuzzy. You feel like you're a soldier for good. And the more that all of this maps toward those kind of actions, the less together we're ever going to be as a people. It's just going to keep on splintering and splintering and splintering until everybody has been touched by this.
I mean, that's fatalist.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of like different elements to this that I don't know how to fix in terms of like, there's a level of this where this is just explained by misogyny, right? These guys are being, they're falling into that men locker room talk, toxic masculinity stereotype, and they're harassing women because through their anonymity online and the tactics that are now available to these men, like they are doing this because of hatred of women. I don't think that's completely wrong. I think that's in there. I don't know if it's the main part of it directly. You know what I mean? When they're going, I hate women, I'm going to do this. There's another part to it that's like, these guys are feel grievance and feel acted upon, and so they are rebelling and trying to get their control back, right? Which again comes out of misogyny. So I'm not saying misogyny is not in this, but it's like there's that side of it too, that it's that way. And then there's the whole like, how much of this is the algorithm? How much of this is social media? How much of this is like people getting radicalized over time because of more and more content that they're watching, and that content is being created because that's the way these creators think, and then they're influencing people, or is it being created because that's what these men are wanting to see, and that's the content they're engaging with more, and so incentivizes the creator to make more content like that. So like one way it's kind of like a people following a leader, and the other way it's kind of like feeding the beast, right? And so where on the spectrum does that come in? And then the failure of media is in here. Like media is just doing such a horrible job. I don't necessarily blame them, because again, like wading through this shit of like what's actually happening and what's not took us 10 years as a society to get to the point where we understand what was happening during Gamergate. And in that 10 years, look at how far the right has gotten, right? So before, what's that, Benjamin Franklin, isn't it? Like a lie can get around the world by the time that the truth has to put its shoes on, or some shit like that, where it's like we're fighting a horrible, like losing war. Like they can move so fast by making shit up, and we're like trying to like go, no, that's not what it means. It's not what it means. It's not what it means. And nobody wants to listen, right? And even if we come out with like, even if every single person who listened to this comes away and being like, oh my God, you just spoke the truth about Gamergate. I believe now that this was a harassment campaign and blah, 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 blah. Even if everybody hears this podcast and comes away with that belief, it's still, on the whole, there are too many people who are just kind of like, this is a muddy water. I don't understand it. And so like ignorance and apathy come into this too. And I think you take all of those elements, right? You take misogyny, and you take victimization and being persecuted, and you take media, and you take the MAGA party, and you kind of put it all into this soup. And it's like, I don't know how to necessarily get us out of it. I don't know how we'd even start to get out of it. I don't even know if it's worth getting out of, insofar as like, do we just say, hey, these guys won, these ideas won, how do we change their ideas? You know what I mean? How do we take this momentum for the Democrats or for the left and use it to counter program and make our own new world. Right? They made a new world order. Well, now we're going to make a new world order. So is it more useful to think of this as like judo rather than war? I think that's a good place to end it.
Well, I'm going to go one step further.
Do it.
You bring up a lot of themes in this, and the big question that you're asking is, how do we combat this? How do we combat the idea that a lie can make it around the world several times over before the truth has time to put on its shoes? And in our current state, our current, let's say, state of public discourse, nobody wants to entertain the fact that they might be wrong. Nobody wants to entertain the fact that they might have been, quote unquote, hoodwinked or manipulated, or even consider that something that they might have espoused or held up more is in and of itself the problem, part of the problem. So asking people to reverse that is maybe a fool's errand. And at the same time, you used the word fatalist a moment ago. I think that there's a part of me that is fatalist, because to sing the song of empathy over and over again, it seems like it might be a fool's errand, and yet it's the only one that I can think of. And so rather than saying you have to think a certain way different than you've been thinking, which I think we can all point to as what Democrats and liberals and progressives, or whatever word you want to throw at it, kind of did in the wake of the 2016 election, where it's like, no, you're thinking wrong, you're thinking wrong, you're thinking wrong. And we see where we are now in 2025. Instead of taking that route where something on that side needs to change, even if I might think that, I'm going to float the most crunchy granola trope that I can think of. Trite as fuck. Which is anybody who's made it this far in this podcast that doesn't agree with us, that thinks that we are part of the problem, I'm not going to ask you to change that opinion. But what I do want to float is one idea, which is, before thinking of someone as an embodiment of a larger problem, think of them as a child. Think of them as a child that grew up into a person who's trying to make sense of stuff just like anybody else. And even if you consider hurt by that person, think of them as someone who's a child just like you were like a child, someone who's just like the children you may have. And let's just start at a base level before taking any action or espousing any comments of hatred or vitriol. Think once again of a single person and just start from there.